The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Camille Roberts. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on leveraging online data to drive customer acquisition with Forrester Research Senior Analyst Joanna O'Connell and DataXu CEO Mike Baker. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items. You'll be in listen-only mode to cut down on background noise. The control panel that you see in front of you can be closed by clicking on the double arrow buttons on the left. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can send them using the question function of the webinar console. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible in the last 15 minutes of today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you an email with a link to the recording in the next day or two. If you want to tweet interesting bits of information, please use the hashtag #FutureOfAdvertising. Our featured speaker today is Joanna O'Connell, Senior Analyst at Forrester Research. Joanna is a veteran of the interactive marketing industry and currently focuses on display marketing, ad targeting, ad optimization, and measurement. In December, she led a team of analysts to publish the much-discussed Forrester Wave on demand-side platforms. We are also joined by Mike Baker, thought leader in the digital media and advertising industries and co-founder of DataXu. DataXu uses machine learning to power an innovative real-time decision system that major advertisers in automotive, financial services, e-commerce, consumer packaged goods, and other industries use to find and engage customers across multiple media channels. And now, without further ado, I'll turn the session over to Mike and Joanna. Mike?
Hey everyone, it's Mike Baker. Thanks for the introduction, Camille. Thank you for joining us, Joanna. Joanna and I are going to talk for about 40 minutes and then leave some time at the end for your questions so we can have some discussion. And how we're going to go through this, I'm going to open up by giving you sort of a long view of what we believe is the opportunity in digital marketing using data and analytics to increase customer acquisition and engagement. Joanna then is going to talk more specifically about the media buying and some of the work she did for the DSP Wave for Forrester. And then I'm going to close by just talking at a very tactical level, what are we seeing marketers do with these tools in terms of the strategies and what to look for in terms of the cutting edge, new things people are doing with them in 2012. And so with that, I'll jump right in. So our story begins with the somewhat obvious observation that digital devices, ubiquitous computing, is changing consumer behavior. The customer's in control in a way that's just fundamentally different from prior times of our consumer society. Not only is there sort of perfect information about price and availability from online to offline, but of course also people are using their devices, be it mobile or tablets or computers, to communicate peer-to-peer, providing a new sort of power to the word-of-mouth marketing and changing the game in terms of how brands advertise. But the good news is all of this digital activity is giving marketers an unprecedented opportunity to understand consumer behavior through the data created by all the digital. And so what we're going to be talking about in terms of the opportunity is how do you profitably engage customers? And our premise really is that companies who do this well will be the new winners. So just as digital is changing consumer behavior, we see consumer behavior is really changing marketing. And to sort of visualize this, we're seeing an output from the DataXu system. It's a heat map showing customer activity for different mobile telephone offers by age group. And these are people responding to the offer of this telecom carrier post-ad exposure. And what we're seeing is that advertising is really sort of a new research, really, in the age of digital consumer data. And Joanna's going to be talking about how a DSP can allow you to take advantage of these insights in real time. So the data we have to analyze as an industry, as marketers, is just growing exponentially. We, as a species, put out a little bit under 2 zettabytes of data in 2011, much of it social and peer-to-peer and user-generated. when we look ahead even 3 years, we're going up an order of magnitude in terms of the information. And this sets up a really challenging situation for most marketers. We'll be talking about research we've done recently, but the majority of marketers, being senior marketers in brands and agencies, acknowledge a real struggle to analyze the digital marketing data being created right now. As we sort of to take a long view of the problem, the solutions we use to gather and process data to make decisions are going to dramatically change in the next couple of years. In fact, leading marketers are already changing how they work. Here, we're going to visualize actually how businesses have been using analytics, and it starts in the 1990s with the traditional data warehouse and an analyst writing queries on the data that's collected there to make a big decision. One decision was made with relatively old data, and as we look at about 10 years ago, we had sort of continuous data monitoring and rules-based alerts run by database administrators, and we saw business using more information, more fresh information to make more decisions. They weren't as big decisions, but there were more of them with better information. And today, we're really coming into an era that's quite different, and we're seeing companies like Facebook, like Google, like Zynga, the internet incumbents have sort of learned this first, but the opportunity is really there for the brand advertiser and its agencies to do the same thing, and that is to make a very high rate of decisions, small decisions with very fresh data, and in so doing to create an overall sort of value to the enterprise by quickly making decisions. These decisions are how to engage customers, and this is a good backdrop as you think about DSPs, data management platforms, and integrated solutions. There is a distinct business value to your ability to quickly make decisions. If you're not able to give your customers what they want, when they want, your competitors will. So we have done some research, and it was done with by the Society for New Communications Research, as I said before, with senior marketing professionals about what's needed for this new world we're quickly entering. And we spoke to respondents about the people, the platform, and the overall ecosystem. And what you told us was, first of all, what's missing is the lack of a single cross-channel digital marketing platform. And that anecdotally is why companies like DataXu have created, why we created DataXu, which is designed to be that very thing, which is built around the data core and information flowing from your websites and mobile sites and videos and other channels, including Facebook, into one data core where one can manage and make sense of all this information for the business purpose of better engaging your customers and making those who are engaged already more profitable. But with all due respect for platforms, what we learned also is, in fact, the biggest challenge really probably is a people challenge. And here, 58% of people we spoke to believe they lack the analytical skills and technology to perform analytics on marketing data. But at the same time, they admitted that 62% of the people rely on the marketing team to make technology decisions. So we're in a very strange place right now in our evolution into the sort of native digital realm, which is in which data and analytics are the coin of the realm. We know we're not doing this right, but we're struggling, frankly, to define the right teams, to recruit the right people, and to define the correct process. And we're not alone as an industry. It doesn't really take McKinsey to tell us that we're actually hundreds of thousands of jobs short of the needed skills that are quantitative to be able to productively use this information to make our businesses more efficient, and that will only get worse, which I'll conclude my sort of opening remarks and turn it over to Joanna by just noting the next slide that there really needs to be a new ecosystem, and everybody when surveyed, acknowledges that we are missing an integrated platform or platforms, and beyond that, we actually sort of need to spend more time talking among ourselves as an industry to figure out how does each kind of service firm or technology firm collaborate to stand up this new ecosystem, because it's pretty clear that no one company can do this alone. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joanna to give us a bit of her thoughts on media buying and maybe some of the platform considerations that form part of the ecosystem.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike, and thanks everyone again for joining. As Mike mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about how all of this sort of big data movement, this focus on quant is impacting the media buying world, specifically the digital media buying world. And then I'd like to take folks through the demand-side platform wave I did, just in a little bit of detail. And then I will hand it back over to Mike. So we're Forrester. We love numbers. So I thought I would start us off with some numbers here. This is from our U.S. Interactive Marketing Forecast 2011 to 2016, which came out a couple months ago. Our forecast is telling us that digital spend is likely to reach $77 billion by 2016. $77 billion is approximately what's spent on television today. It's a pretty big number. It's interesting as well to look specifically at a few channels that comprise that $77 billion, specifically social, mobile, and display. You'll see that social represents a relatively small proportion of the overall total, but is growing at quite a strong rate, and that is not surprising given the just dramatic growth of publishers like Facebook. Mobile, similarly, will remain relatively small as an overall percentage of the pie, a little above 10%, but the growth rate is just phenomenal at almost 40%. What I think is also really interesting here is that display advertising, and in this instance, display includes a video, among other things, but display advertising, which represents quite a significant portion of the overall pie at around $27 billion in 2016, is also seeing very, very healthy growth, 20% year over year. Now, I think we all know, or at least any of those of us who have worked in digital media buying and planning and management, we know that the way that things are done today is fairly inefficient, if not very inefficient. And so what's going to help us get to those really, really strong numbers as an industry? Well, one of the things that's going to help us is some changes in the way that we buy, manage, evaluate, optimize our media programs. And, it's been an interesting, I think, challenge for digital media buyers over the last 15 years or so since the advent of the banner, the 468 by 60 banner. If you rewind to the mid-1990s, the world was fairly simple for those of us that were digital media buyers, myself included. We had just a few sites to choose from. Everything we did was quite manual, site-level negotiations over the phone. We made reports were in Excel. We made changes in Excel. We emailed things. It was very manual. And at the time, we really were still relying on content as a proxy to reach the audience. Now, I know everyone likes to throw that phrase around, but the reality is that it is an important paradigm because it was a paradigm that existed for so many years prior and so many media that came before digital, this model of content as a proxy for audience. And that changed quite dramatically over the ensuing 10 to 15 years. And you can't kind of undervalue the impact of that change. Along those same lines, there was a dramatic change just in the amount of inventory and the number of sites that were available to buyers. So in the early 2000s, we were still doing things in very manual ways. We were negotiating manually, we were optimizing manually, we were reporting quite manually, but we were increasingly needing to turn to other solutions to make our lives a little easier and a little bit more operationally efficient. And they took the form of yearly ad networks. who provided supplemental reach and efficiency. We were still relying on content as a proxy for audience because, again, it was a model that we understood. But from our perspective at Forrester, remarketing around the early 2000s or so was really the first sign of a very, very dramatic change in the tides. Fast forward just a few years to the mid-2000s, and there were, with the huge explosion of social, millions of sites to choose from. A real increased reliance as a result on the growing number of undifferentiated networks to give us reach and efficiency. As I said, I was a digital media planner and buyer, and I remember getting phone calls every day from Ed Network A, B, C, and D that I'd never heard of. It was a good business for them, so they exploded. The challenge for the buyers is it left us with very little visibility into our programs and very little insight into our programs, which was not only frustrating to us as the buyers, it was frustrating to our clients because we couldn't give them much detail into what was happening with their money. It was simply a it's working or it's not working kind of model. And certainly the increase in audience targeting was growing, and the number of options was growing. It was an interesting time, as I said, a time of a great deal of change, and something kind of sort of quiet but ultimately very big started to happen around the mid-2000s when we in the buying community started to hear about this ad exchange model and this demand-side platform model. And I think what's interesting about it is it helped illuminate issues that I don't think we understood in our conscious minds really existed and were causing problems for us. So when you look at the more traditional ad network model, I'm not picking on anyone in particular here, just this model in general, it was based on tenets of opaque pricing, so margins were undisclosed in terms of the price that was paid to the publisher relative to the price that was charged to the buyer. And so for us in the buying community, we didn't really have a real sense of what the impression was really worth relative to what we're paying for it. Media was bundled, so impressions were sold in packages of 1,000, which made it tough for us to really focus on the best impressions. We did not have placement level transparency. I mean, even when you were running a program where you had ad tags that were running at the 468 versus 350 versus 728 by 90 level, you really didn't know what was happening within each of those line items. So you might have gotten a site list, but you really had no guarantee of placement on any particular site, and you certainly didn't have site-level reporting. And then a really big challenge here was that optimization was very black box. So the methods that were used by these third parties were quite opaque, and that left us as the buying community with very little insight into what was driving performance and why. Now, when we started to look at the ad exchange, the bid-based model, and the DSP model, we started to see the opportunity for things like price transparency, where we would have a better sense of what the actual price was for an individual impression. That gave us more of an opportunity to also be more granular about how we then bought impressions. So cherry-picking impressions to choose only those that really seemed like the right ones for us based on expected returns. It also gave us the opportunity for increased control, so allowing us as buyers to sit in the driver's seat, as it were, and make the buying decisions and pull the levers, which was not something that had traditionally been afforded to display media buyers. It was something that existed, and at this point in a relatively mature way in the search engine marketing world, but not in the display advertising world. And then finally, what did all this mean? Well, what it really meant was insight. So this transparency, the granularity, and the control allowed us to have much greater insight and much more knowledge into what was happening with our programs, and all of a sudden, it gave us the opportunity to make repeatable decisions based on things that we learned, and that was, really a big leap forward. So, what's really interesting, and this is data from 2011, from June 2011, is when you ask buyers, what would make your life easier from a workflow standpoint, we do hear from them that they're hungry for better tools and processes. So we went out and surveyed a bunch of interactive marketers, specifically digital media buyers, back this summer. My colleague Michael Green and I were really interested in hearing from the buying community on how they were thinking about planning and buying, how they were thinking about publisher relationships, how they were thinking about workflow, new technologies, media mix, and these kinds of things. And so one of the questions we asked them was, which of the following would do the most to improve your current workflow processes? Now, 52% said a better system for executing and managing the buying programs that encompass multiple channels, so display, search, video, mobile. 37% said a centralized buying platform where I could execute and optimize all my buys in one place. And 59%, of course, obviously multiple responses were accepted here, 59% said a better system for measuring and analyzing the performance of programs encompassing multiple channels. So clearly, there is interest in the buying community and need in the buying community for better tools. Now, along similar lines, we are starting to see the buying community start to embrace some of those tools, specifically buying tools that improve over the conventional buying model and move us more toward a more programmatic buying model. So we asked folks about how they negotiate and manage buys today. And we asked them, you know, do you do it in the traditional way, phone calls, emails, individual IOs, which we denote as conventional buying. Do you do it entirely through programmatic buying methods, like the DSP or trading desk, or do you do it in a mix of those ways? And it was interesting because, you know, direct buys are certainly still the norm, with 43% saying I primarily negotiate in this way. But 48% said I negotiate and manage my buys through a mix of conventional and programmatic buying. So there's obviously something happening here. They're saying that they're interested in finding better tools to manage their programs, and they're starting to embrace those tools. Slowly, but they're starting to. So we were also interested in understanding what kind of mix of media solutions and vendors buyers were using. So kind of digging into this question a little further, going beyond just the conventional versus programmatic question and actually looking at the media mix. And this was specifically for display advertising. So we asked them, what statement describes the type of media partners that you use to buy display today? And almost 60% said my team buys from a wide variety of publishers, as well as through DSPs and trading desks, or trading desks, and ad networks. Only 3% said my team buys only from a small group of trusted publishers. So there really is a range of ways now that media buyers are taking advantage of media access. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves as an industry and recognize the fact that change is hard and scary, and it's not necessarily human nature to be open to change. And the three martini lunch model, the conventional model, has an extremely strong legacy. I mean, there are systems and processes that have been put in place for media channels like television that are very, very entrenched. And buyers have been valued for a very specific set of skills. And one of those skills was haggling on price, focusing on getting the absolute lowest price. Now, the challenge here, of course, is that in this much more nuanced world in which we live, I think we can all agree that cheapness is not the same as efficiency. Simply getting the lowest price does not mean that you've actually gotten the most appropriate opportunity in a given instance for a given client. And so our position here at Forrester is that these old skills aren't all necessarily so relevant anymore. They don't necessarily translate in this new world in which we live, where the amount of inventory options available, publisher options available, audience targeting options available, can be managed in the way that it has been managed before. So some of these skills, like buying clout, being very large, you know, negotiation skills in terms of creating strategic relationships, those things still matter, right? But relying entirely on haggling down on price, relying entirely on outmoded processes like manual management of programs, you know, that the time for those things is starting to wane. I think it becomes a world where data-driven decision-making, de-averaged pricing, impression-level buying, and automated management is on the rise. And it's interesting. I think it flows very naturally from what Mike was talking about. We use the word data a lot. We use the phrase data-driven decision-making a lot. And I hope that it isn't starting to be cheapened. I hope that people appreciate the fact that this is a very, very real change that needs to happen. I liked Mike's stats from McKinsey around the need for quants and all the open quant jobs. If that doesn't point to it, I don't know what does. So, we have to be honest with ourselves as an industry. Change is really painful. And as a result of that, change happens slowly. So I created a little mock media plan at some point not too long ago that I thought I would share. And probably this will look familiar to some of you on the phone. This is a media plan that I would have had a few years ago when I was working as a digital media supervisor, where you would have several publishers with run-of-site placements, particularly if you're trying to meet some kind of aggressive direct response goal, for example. You'd have a few publishers, you'd have a whole bunch of ad networks, and you'd have a little DSP line item that you threw in on the end because you're starting to test it. Now, there are challenges with this, right? I'm sure we've all seen plans like this, but there are challenges with this. I think one of the obvious ones is the potential for overlap. That certainly is a challenge if you have several large programs running on networks that are all accessing, for all intents and purposes, the same audiences. Certainly, if there are no other problems with this, the loss of frequency control is a major problem. It's not something I think I liked to think about when I was a media planner and buyer, but things like user experience do actually matter. That does have an impact on their level of favorability toward a brand and in their likelihood to respond, for example, to a message. When you have 11 or 15 individual publishers or media partners managing frequency individually, you end up with complete loss of frequency control, which means waste, which means a bad user experience. And so really what it comes down to here is so much opportunity for waste in a program like this. So we at Forrester think that in the long term, there needs to be a change in the media buying community. Media buyers need to start specializing. On the one hand, on the left, you have programmatic buyers, and on the other hand, on the right, you have custom buyers. And so let's talk for a second about programmatic buyers. This doesn't just mean buyers that are focused on meeting direct response goals. Frankly, I think this can mean any kind of broad-based buying, whether it's direct response or brand-oriented. The opportunity to use technology, so platform-based buying, the opportunity to focus on algorithmic optimization, regardless of what your goal is, and a focus on quantitatively savvy and data-driven buyers, I think is really what's going to make up this buying community. Whereas on the right, I think we can all agree that digital has created a tremendous opportunity for brands to create really, really unique custom brand experiences for their users. And I think that that takes a certain set of skills. Negotiation, buying, optimization, that can be on a site-by-site basis or publisher-by-publisher basis. And the focus is really on creating deep relationships and creating brand experiences that are rich and immersive. And of course, there needs to be some overarching layer of strategy that pulls those things together and creates a cohesive set of messages out to the marketplace. For today, I just want to talk a little bit about the tools that these guys on the programmatic buying side can use to help them be successful. So let's talk about demand-side platforms for a minute. And I'll just say, just a word on my own experience. I was, as I said, a digital planner and buyer for quite a while. I worked at Avenue A, which ultimately became Razorfish, and got very, very excited about the exchange and DSP opportunity several years ago, and ended up really embracing it inside of my own organization. And so my experience with DSPs is both sort of personal in my professional life, and now, much more kind of academic, as I've done this very, very deep dive into the DSP space through the WAVE exercise. So how do we see DSPs? Well, first of all, they're buy-side focused, they're platforms, and they enable a few things. They enable centralized management across programmatic media, They enable automated real-time algorithmic optimization. They enable some or all of unified campaign tracking and reporting. And they enable audience targeting and, to varying degrees, audience insights. So let's talk for a second about the wave itself. This was a process that we launched late in the summer and completed in Q4. It's a pretty rigorous process that we go through as we develop these waves. We created a whole host of criteria that we determined, along with the vendor selected for the wave, determined were important in a demand-side platform. And then we gathered information from all of these vendors. In our case, it was 7 vendors. The one that you don't see listed here is Google, or Invite Media, which is the platform that Google acquired. They were a non-participating vendor, so they did not get included in the full wave comparison. So in our case, we took these 7 vendors. We gathered a great deal of information from them. We also gathered information from their clients to get some additional perspectives on what comprises the DSP and what each of these vendors were good at and where they needed to grow. We looked at things like media access and support. What channels could you access to the DSP? What supply sources could you access to the DSP? What kind of flexibility was there in different sorts of contractual relationships that you could bring through this DSP? We looked at data access and support. What providers were the DSP integrated with? What kinds of DMP features did the DSP have? How did the DSP ingest data? What kind of infrastructure was there around data? We looked at algorithmic optimization capabilities. We looked at things like QPS capacity. We looked at what sorts of approach to algorithmic optimization they used, what kinds of models that they used, how well they were judged by their clients in terms of algorithmic optimization, and so on and so forth. We looked at reporting, of course, because especially as a self-serve user, you want to be able to pull reports on an ad hoc basis and get a sense at any given moment how your program is working and what's happening with your program and why, pulling insights out of there. We were interested in understanding what kind of visualization there was for the algorithmic optimization, what kinds of flexibility there was in the reporting platform, and so on. And we looked at a number of other things too, brand safety. We looked at other ancillary tools and technologies like the presence or absence of ad serving technology. We looked at advanced attribution capabilities of these vendors. We looked at a whole host of things to come up with what ultimately boils down to a very basic oversimplified chart of the end results of the wave. It was an extremely interesting it is also rapidly evolving and maturing into quite a sophisticated group of providers that are creating very rich tools and services for marketers and buyers. So these 2 graphics are from a report that we wrote called The Future of Digital Media Buying. I think it's fair to say that the programmatic buying ecosystem of today is going to look quite different than the programmatic buying ecosystem of tomorrow. So let's skip to the next graphic. I think the integrated stack of tomorrow is all about centralization, specialization, and data. I think that first and third-party data will be much more directly plugged in to centralized platforms for data management and analytics. I think that'll sit a lot closer to the clients than it does today. And in some cases, the centralized media buying platform, which will be used to access RTB-enabled supply that isn't just display, but encompasses multiple channels, will be very, very deeply linked to the data management and analytics components. I think that those 3 things in the longer term become much, much more deeply integrated into a unified stack. And in some cases, you're already starting to see that happening today. If you look at a company like Google, they're making significant acquisition moves to be able to pull the different components of the stack together, and not just for display, but for other channels as well. If you look at somebody like Adobe, who has acquired, and certainly was already in the web analytics space, but has now acquired a data management platform in Bembex, and more recently acquired Efficient Frontier, which is a leader in the automated search engine marketing management space, and has also gotten aggressively into display advertising. You're starting to see that happen. And certainly you're seeing that happen with several of the DSPs who are aggressively moving toward building out not just media buying capabilities, but audience management capabilities and advanced attribution and measurement capabilities as well. We have a long way to go in this ecosystem, but I'm very excited for where things are going. I think, as we continue to embrace the role and value of data, and as these tools and technologies get smarter, there's such an opportunity to be much more sophisticated about the way that we as media buyers buy, manage, and optimize and measure our programs. That's it for me. So I'm just going to hand it back over now to Mike.
Well, thanks, Joanna. Great job, and we're lucky as an industry to have somebody as committed and passionate about the space as you to help guide us through the fog. I'm going to try to compress the last bit of this so we have as much time as possible for questions. What I thought we'd do is continue to kind of get into some detail and talk about two things. What are the top 4 tactics that marketers and agencies are using these DSP platforms for, or integrated platforms, as it may be, and what to look for? What are the new strategies and the new moves people are using these tools to do in 2012? So the 4 things that have been in play for 2011: retargeting, audience buying, prospecting, and hyper-targeting. We'll talk about each of these briefly. First of all, retargeting. This is the idea of setting a cookie on a visitor to your site and then remessaging the person when they're off the site, the theory being this is somebody who actually did not convert but is interested. And what we've learned as an industry here is retargeting works very well. Every marketer should be using retargeting where they're leaving money on the table. This can take advantage of your current media, be it word of mouth, TV, online advertising, and just help current hand raisers, help close those people. What we've learned as an industry is, 2 years ago, DSPs would sort of set up multiple flights according to how recently a visitor came. So they may pay $4 for a one-day old visitor to the site to find them and remessage them again, $3 for 2 days, et cetera, et cetera. What platforms like DataXu do today with super retargeting is sort of automatically calculate the bid value decay curve so that you continuously bid down a curve based specifically on your brand and campaign. What this means is you actually create more conversions at lower cost. A second tactic that's quite popular is the idea of audience buying. This has appealed to many brand marketers who intuitively grasp the value of precision audience targeting, some of which Joanna talked about. So 2 years ago, you might run an audience buy by simply purchasing a list of consumers like auto intenders and running that across one ad exchange, sort of serving ad impressions to people against consumers where there was a match against the cookie list, essentially, you were renting. Today, in tools like DataXu's DX3, you're actually doing custom audience creation. And it's really kind of stunning how fast this industry has developed, even to me. There's 22,000 third-party data segments from 15+ third-party data brokers, which can be mixed and matched with Boolean expressions. You can sort of see how large the audience you created will be, and then even forecast how your budget and pacing will serve out against this audience as they show up across the sites that are, today 20 different ad exchanges, including even, video and mobile. The third popular strategy is prospecting. Prospecting is a little bit different. This is looking for new visitors to your site. So, if our problem was just closing people who are interested in our brands, that life would be easy. But of course, we need to fill the top part of the funnel and get people initially interested in engaging with our brand. So this is a tactic for new visitors. And what the industry is learning is that prospecting is really a great area for testing the algorithmic optimization capabilities of a DSP. what this entails is essentially running a broad array of advertising across sites, creatives, and consumers, sort of seeing what works empirically to drive traffic and doing more of that. And this is a terrific tactic to run in tandem with retargeting. Leading marketers using these programmatic buying tools are realizing the way to get more scale out of retargeting, which looks just super good from an ROI perspective, is actually to do intelligent prospecting to fill the top of the funnel and get more lower funnel conversions. Then lastly, in terms of current strategies, hyper-targeting. And this is really easing complex business rules. So this is something that we've seen a lot of activity with automotive, packaged goods, retail. This is a campaign that, for instance, would say, I would like to message consumers within 3 miles of identified Walmart stores, and to actually do that day-parted in local daylight hours between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. across 240, let's say, sub-DMA regions. And that's a very sort of tough set of campaigns to set up manually. It makes all media buyers groan. You've got to upload all of that. You've got to edit it. Well, with programmatic buying tools like DataXu, there's the concept of bulk upload for very complicated business rules and bulk editing of these flights. So again, this is something of interest to some of the brand advertisers who are maybe a little bit less performance-oriented and really just have precision business rules where they want to ratably pace out a very complex budget. So those are some of the things that have really grown and are in play as common strategies. As we look ahead to 2012, there seem to be no signs of slowing down in the innovation and the use cases that marketers are putting these new tools to. We at DataXu are sort of trying our best to keep up with people and also really looking and enjoying opportunities to collaborate and sort of define what's possible. So these 5 things I'll tick through relatively quickly. The first is brand optimization, and this is a very significant offering for we're seeing brands who really haven't done much in digital marketing coming in and saying, I'm not looking for sort of a click conversion per se. I'm really looking to change sentiment around a long consideration item or one that's bought purely offline. So what tools like DataXu are able to do is actually sort of run versus exposed groups to advertising, and during the pendency of the campaign, do simple surveys across tens of millions of people and shift the budgets where the sentiment is favorably moving. For instance, towards favorability towards a new truck engine as compared to its competitors pre and post ad exposure. So not only is it research, but actually the research is being applied to the media so as to concentrate the spend where sentiment empirically is showing it can be shifted. A new strategy number 2 is programmatic premium decisioning. You'll hear more about this, but the early adopters for these DSPs have said, this is terrific, the data and analytics, the efficiency I'm getting out of this. I would like to move this beyond the ad exchanges to actually run this through my guaranteed sort of premium buys. And really what's happening here is we're using impression level decisioning, where we look at each ad impression coming in, to make some inferences about the person behind the ad impression, and then serve the appropriate offer based on the demographic or geographic or even behavioral segmentation. So some people think of this as really enterprise yield management of advertising investment, for instance, across multiple consumer brands from one overarching packaged goods company. The fourth new area is the industry is really trying to crack into attribution. Beyond the last click conversion model, where you only credit the last click, beyond the last view, where you only credit the last ad, shown before a conversion, and understanding, there's a consumer journey that is comprised of multiple touches, multiple marketing events, and even multiple channels, and even things that sort of aren't really channels. They're even peer-to-peer. So we're getting close to a time when we can all see actually recording these events and having a fully reconciled attribution path. And what's really interesting about this is doing this within the DSP world, we can actually create a custom attribution model and then use that to run the buying and the bidding. So you have sort of customized attribution model. It's not just a report. It's actually doing impression level buying of your media based on the attribution model that shows the highest return on ad spend for your brand or campaign. Fourth, just cross-channel optimization. Again, a theme where there's a lot of experimentation starting to occur. This is a very exciting and interesting. Our industry has been working in channel silos for practical reasons, but also sort of entrenched business practices. We all know this doesn't really make sense, but it's actually hard to sort of converge these things. So we are seeing now tests of optimizing simultaneously within multiple channels, but also across channels. And here I list social as a channel just because so often if it's Facebook, it's a closed data environment, so some of the efforts are going to be somewhat impaired. But how can I take the data out of each of these channels, put it into one core, and then use it to enhance the decisioning and the investment returns from all of them, beyond the sort of static media mix model. And then lastly, all of this data, I said, advertising is research. Well, we're seeing companies literally act on that, saying, I'm generating so much information from my advertising. Of course, I'm trying to acquire customers, but can I also use these learnings and overlay data segments to actually start to break down sort of behaviorally, even psychographically, how my current customers on my website, regardless of media, how they index by product type or even by sub-brand for my overarching brand, according to some things like news or photo sharing or gains or social networking. And what's really interesting is we're seeing marketers start to sort of differentially segment their customer base and think about this information for offline programs, for content partnerships, even product selection and design. What's fascinating, though, this is information that's generated through all of the data and analytics that during this program we've really been talking about in the realm of advertising. So customer intelligence from all this data shows us really the advertising is starting to become more strategic even beyond the customer acquisition. And with that, we will turn it over to questions.
Thank you both, Mike and Joanna. We'd like to open up the webinar for questions now. And we've heard from a couple of our attendees that they are unable to access the question function. So if you could tweet your questions to #DataXu, we can answer them live. Okay, so our first question is, it's in reference to a slide that we saw a couple minutes ago on prospecting. The question is, to me, DSPs are all about audience buying. Can you explain a little bit more about how prospecting works, please? It sounds like that might be reference to the slide that Mike just gave.
Yeah, sure. So prospecting is a very different way of running a buy. It's basically discovering sort of demand for your product or your campaign without having a going-in set of rules. For instance, a geographic or a demographic segment, or even a specific kind of content that you think your audience shows up on. So this is sort of trusting the model and the data to guide you towards a media plan. Think of it as almost the inverse of how media planning has worked traditionally, which was research, plan, buy. This is buy. The buy gives you the research, which then instantiates the plan. So it's a very different way of working. It can be highly cost-effective as a way to drive novel traffic to your digital assets. And it can also be a good way to discover. You can do data overlay on the traffic that's coming and saying, again, like a scientist would, let's just describe who are the people that are engaging, and then use that to refine our thinking about who is our target customer.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a question which is on multiple channels. This one is addressed to Joanna. Joanna, in December's WAVE report, you gave media access the highest weighting. How do we know which platforms work across multiple channels and which ones don't?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it helps if you can actually dig into the WAVE model itself. There's a lot more detail. If you're a Forrester client, you can actually access the full Excel spreadsheet, which is a multi-tab spreadsheet that gives a great deal of detail about every one of the individual vendors that we took a look at, and all of the information and answers are in there. But in general, what I was looking at was which of these vendors can access display, which can access display plus. So plus was mobile inventory, plus was video inventory, plus was social inventory, and so on and so forth. In the case of X plus 1 actually also can apply their targeting and optimization to site side. In general, the reality is that the bulk of the impressions that are running through these platforms today are display impressions. There's a growing amount of video inventory that you're starting to see, followed by mobile, and then a couple of the DSPs, DataXu being an example, have API access into some of the Facebook inventory. But generally, it's largely display today. I think in the longer term, as some of the technological challenges get worked out and some of the business relationship challenges get worked out, you'll start to see the real kind of power of multi-channel come to life. It exists today, but in a more limited way.
Well, one other thing I would add, Joanna, is you know, many people look at this whole part of the advertising industry and credit Google with their launch of DataXu for real-time bidding in 2009 fall as being the real catalyst for the space. Well, we've seen in really the last month, Google has now launched mobile real-time bidding. DataXu's one of the beta buyers, and some sort of see that as a catalytic event for mobile sort of evolving a little bit faster in the same direction?
I hope so. I'd love to see that. I think that the opportunity for marketers is so great to be able to have conversations with users that are not tied to an individual channel. So anything that moves that along, I'm interested in seeing for the sake of the industry.
Okay, here's another question, and I'm not sure whether this is a Joanna or a Mike question. This one is, since the DSP space is new, there's great reach for mainstream products, but can you tell us how this affects niche products?
I guess it depends on what we mean by products here. Are we talking about, you know, if you're a B2B advertiser, for example?
Well, it's a tweet, and I'm not sure exactly. It sounds like B2B advertising.
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the reality is that if you have some kind of goal that you're trying to optimize to, you can do it with a DSP. As long as there's some kind of event that you can actually put in place that becomes your primary optimization metric, in theory, the algorithmic capability of the DSPs will be able to reach great efficiency in helping you meet whatever goal that is. Now, if the question is, can you target very specific niche audiences? It's funny. I think mostly B2B advertisers feel like they can't. I would argue that you probably can. You know, will the scale be as large as if you're selling kind of the average widget that the average user needs? Probably not. But there are just a whole host of audience targeting providers that are integrated with the DSPs that may have those niche audiences that you're looking for. You could conceivably even go out and look for niche publishers that you can access through a biddable environment using a DSP.
Okay, thanks. One more. This one is also a tweet. My client receives 70% bookings offline via phone. How is this being addressed in attribution modeling?
Yeah, that's a good one and a tough one.
Why don't I try to take that?
Sure.
Excuse me. There's certain classes of goods which are predominantly transacted offline. When it happens digitally, it makes the data collection and processing easier. When it doesn't, we've done typically a couple of things. Most people have a digital record being created somewhere in the customer conversion or onboarding process. And For instance, we're even seeing e-commerce receipts that come as HTML email that can be synced back to an attribution path. So we would sort of ask specifically what the IT environment looks like for that client. Can we get a digital bit out of the conversion somewhere? And ideally, that can also correlate to a cookie, so we can sort of do a full path analysis. If it can't, such as in the case of the sale of packaged goods at stores, then we typically will use a panel-based approach, where you're not sort of doing a one-for-one census, consumer journey, but you're looking through enough conversions that where you can actually have a statistically valid sample and model off of that for reliably describing a multi-touch marketing attribution path.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, I don't know if this is what you're referencing, Mike, but I mean, there are companies out there that have that can actually tie those sort of self-reported or actual behaviors offline to the online component. And do you incorporate partnerships with those folks to do that, or how do you do that?
Yeah, well, so the people who one of the things that's sort of enabling this whole space, so the programmatic buying and the attribution, is the companies that specialize in, for instance, running a panel of shopper loyalty card information, or even the ComScores of the world, are increasingly sort of trying to set cookies or other identifiers to be able to recognize the traffic anonymously. And as soon as you sort of begin that process, companies like DataXu are just to deal with customer demand, sort of pervasively synchronizing information so that these models and IDs can be ported from one vendor to another, and the information can be used to back to the ecosystem slide, to sort of bring the systems together to solve bigger problems versus each company trying to solve the whole thing themselves.
Well, and I think one of the big, I think the problem is that this challenge often creates paralysis, and so what folks end up doing is using not great proxy metrics as their optimization metric, which frankly I think ultimately holds digital investment back. So yeah, it can be quite a tough exercise, and I think in a lot of cases organizations don't necessarily have the chops or have the resources to go through that exercise. But I think it's a really worthwhile exercise, and certainly there are a lot of technology vendors and service vendors out there that can kind of fill in the gaps to be able to help bring something like that to life. And that wasn't necessarily the case, 5-10 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Joanna and Mike. We're at the top of the hour now, and we still have a couple of questions. We'll email your responses to you. Sorry we didn't get to everything. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We'll be sending you a link to the recording of the webinar, and you can also visit DataXu.com and download a free copy of the Forrester Wave report that Joanna has discussed. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joanna.
Thanks so much.